Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. I really, really do. I just wanted to sit down today and film a video just expressing my support and my solidarity for the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that are currently happening. I know that my little corner of BookTube, my little platform, is quite small and it feels like you're not going to make any sort of difference whatsoever, but I think it's really important to be vocal and to talk about these issues and to not be silent. Your words can make an impact and your silence can make an impact even further still. I wanted to come here today and talk about a few book recommendations. At the moment, I know a lot of people are currently asking for recommendations for education on Black Lives Matter or just trying to find more diverse reading recommendations. I know what a great impact books can have on building your knowledge, your understanding and your empathy, and whilst education is not the only step, it is just the first, and there are plenty of other things that people can be doing. I'm going to be leaving links to donate, to sign petitions, just do whatever you can to make a stand and have your voice heard on this issue. I'm also a big believer that this is not something that you should only be talking about now and reading up about and educating yourself on now. This is something that you have to make an effort, a conscious effort, to be learning about for the rest of your life. It is just so important to be constantly improving your understanding, reading diversely, because we can't keep on going as we are. I felt unsure about this recommendation video because I know that I am nowhere near the most qualified person to talk about this. I know I haven't read anywhere near enough, but I also know that there are going to be people who are watching this video who have never considered reading diversely, who have not read these things, and it is for those people. If I can have one person find a recommendation here and they read it and enjoy it, I feel like that's worth it somehow. Like I say, this is not an exhaustive list. There are so many more places that you can go, and I'm going to link all of that down below. But here are some of my personal recommendations for you. I know for a lot of people, particularly like white British teenagers, it was the Noughts and Crosses series by Malorie Blackman. That was the first piece of literature for a lot of us that really showed a narrative about racism. But I also think for a lot of people it was kind of where the conversation started and also where it ended. They felt too uncomfortable after reading this to pursue it further, and I think this is a starting point, but this is far from the last thing to read on this topic. This series follows Sethi and Callum, who live in a world in which the power dynamic is reversed, in which the black crosses are the dominant elite and the white noughts are seen as second-class citizens. In this series, Malorie Blackman really highlights just the absurdity and the cruelty of racist structures and how institutional racism permeates into the history that we're taught, into the laws, into culture, and just so many different facets of society. I think it also demonstrated that teenagers are not too young to be learning about this, and children are not too young to be learning about this. Racism is something that we need to tackle from a young age. It is not too hard for your child to understand this. You have to be teaching this as early as possible. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, I know, is such a favourite writer for so many different people, but I in particular wanted to mention her non-fiction on feminism. These just have small little snippets of her writing on feminism, and they are so very powerful. And in particular, I wanted to highlight Purple Hibiscus. This was her first novel, and I feel like this is the one that gets the least attention, but it was my personal favourite of her works. This takes place in Nigeria and follows Kambili and her brother Jaja, who are raised by a very strict religious father. Their lives are particularly affected after they are sent away to live with their aunt, who demonstrates to them a much more loving, much more warm, comfortable family life. It's a book that really examines how having the right support network around you, having people that you love around you, can really make such a big difference on your life. It's really beautifully written, and I want this to get more attention. Next is Such a Fun Age by Reid. I know that I did talk about this a little bit in my April wrap-up, but I feel like I'm now coming to this with even fresher eyes after all of the protests that have been going on, especially when we are talking about how we as white people can support, and a lot of people talking about not wanting to be too performative. I feel like this gives a really interesting insight into, being performative. I've seen so many people posting about how they don't want to post things because they don't want to be performative, and I feel like you surely know if you're being performative with your activism. You know if you're not being sincere. And I feel like this book really examines that issue of white saviorism and being performative and really shines a light on that. Next is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. This takes place about 300 years ago in Ghana, in which there are two half-sisters, one of whom is sold into slavery, the other marries a slave owner, and it follows the next 6 generations of what happens to the descendants of each of these sisters. It is very raw, very brutal, very powerful. I feel like for a lot of people, the issue that they have with this is that it does take place over multiple different perspectives as they go down the generations, but I never felt like that. I felt like each story, each generation got just enough time to really understand each character, understand their personality and the history that was sprouting up around them. I thought it was really, really excellent. Next is a booktube favourite. It is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. This was, I remember, shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I am still cross that this didn't win. This is set in 1980s Nigeria, in which Yejide and Akin are a happily married couple whose lives and their relationship are suddenly irrevocably altered when his family demand that he take a second wife, since Yejide is currently unable to give him children. It really talks about relationships and feelings of neglect from family and is just so powerful. I absolutely love it, and still so grumpy that it didn't win. Next we have An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. This was nominated and won the Women's Prize last year, and I was so delighted. It never happens that the book that I want to win actually does win. This is about the marriage between Celestial and Roy, who live in America. Celestial and Roy are just beginning their marriage. They're in their first year of marriage when Roy is wrongfully imprisoned for a crime that he did not commit, and how their relationship is altered by this wrongful imprisonment. With Roy's absence, Celestial starts taking comfort in her best friend Andre, and it basically explores how their relationship ends up developing and how her relationship with Roy deteriorates as he remains in prison. These characters are given enough time to feel fully formed, and you understand the motivation behind what they do. And yeah, you just are left with this feeling of how unjust the criminal justice system really is. Next we have My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This follows the story of Queenie, who is a nurse whose sister Ayula keeps on murdering her boyfriends, and we do not know how far it is deliberate and how far it is in self-defense. And the conflict that Queenie feels for her sister roping her into this, and how conflicted she feels when her sister sets her sights on a young doctor who Queenie has been in love with for her entire career. This has so much dark humour. It is quite dry at times, which was quite jarringly funny. It pokes quite a lot of fun at the situation, but really is a portrait of the lengths that you will go for family. It is absolutely brilliant and funny, and I really highly recommend this. We then have Ordinary People by Diana Evans. This takes place in 2008 and follows two married couples as their relationships start to deteriorate and break down. It's about day-to-day life. It's about how having children can really take a toll on your sense of self and your identity. It's a really, really beautiful read, and if you are somebody like me who really likes character-focused, relationship-focused novels, this is definitely for you. Next, we have The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, which is an absolute classic staple. This is set in the Deep South in rural Georgia in the 1930s, and we follow the life of the main character, Celie. Celie suffers from absolutely horrific abuse in her family life, slowly but surely through the course of the novel starts to break away from this and take so much power and strength. Celia is just such a magnificently strong character. Like I say, Alice Walker is not shy at all in the depiction of the brutality of the abuse that Celia suffers in this novel, but also demonstrates just the enormous power of female friendship and of female love. It is harrowing, but it is a modern classic for a reason. It is so, so powerful. We then have Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. This tied with The Testaments by Margaret Atwood for the Book Prize last year. This book follows multiple fictional perspectives from mostly Black women living in Britain. However, the perspectives vary in terms of their background and their age, though they are all interconnected in one way or another. This book follows so many different topics: politics, theatre, feminism, creation. Just, I don't think I can really summarise this book in any sort of adequate way, but it really goes to show how there is not just one narrative of Black womanhood in Britain. There are so many different perspectives, and I really highly recommend that you read this. And then the last fiction book to show you is Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. This has been getting so much buzz and so much attention in the last year or so. This follows Queenie Jenkins, who is a 25-year-old Black woman living in London. This book has been highly compared to Bridget Jones, is described as the Black Bridget Jones story. And I can see that in a lot of ways. I mean, Queenie is really struggling to work out how to navigate her life. She is a bit of a mess, and she isn't a perfect character. She even has her own prejudices and makes the wrong decisions, and you can't help but just think, Queenie, no! But I think to call it another Bridget Jones is to be quite reductive. This is definitely its own story. It looks at mental health, the topic of trying to find your identity, carve out your identity and your place in the world, and relationships, and I really highly recommend that you read this. We're now veering more into poetry and non-fiction, and of course I have to recommend Maya Angelou as an author. She is most well known for her memoirs, especially I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, which is the first of the 6 memoirs. But I really in particular want to highlight her poetry. I think it's absolutely stunning, and I have this poetry collection, And Still I Rise. This is one of my favourite poetry collections. It is one of the most hopeful, strong, powerful poetry collections that I have ever read. And the title poem, Still I Rise, is one of my favourite poems. It's just so stunning and beautiful and powerful, and just gives you that message of hope and resilience. And it is stunning. It is stunning. I really recommend that you read this. Next we have Citizen, an American lyric by Claudia Rankine. This is a novel-length poem which depicts what it is like to live as a Black woman in America in modern day. It talks about like the big media events that are so often talked about, but also focuses in on the daily microaggressions that really chip away. I remember reading Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth by Warsenshire and finding it so raw and honest and just brutal. This is just a slimline little volume of poetry, but it talks about womanhood, particularly womanhood when dealing with trauma and war. And it is absolutely beautiful, beautiful poetry. I couldn't film this video without talking about Somebody Give This Heart a Pen by Sophia Thakur. This is my favourite volume of poetry that I've read this year, and I really, really want more people to read this. It is stunning. I don't know if you can see how many times I tabbed these poems. I do it every single time I come across like a beautiful poem, and it was every other page. It is just the most beautiful, glorious writing about relationships, about carving out your identity, particularly Sophia as a mixed race woman, and discovering your inner courage and finding your voice and finding a way to make art. I just need more people to read this. It is beautiful. Next we have a little collection from Penguin. This is Audre Lorde's The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House. This is a little slimline essay collection with Audre Lorde's thoughts on systemic racism, on LGBTQ issues, on the civil rights movement, on poetry. It is short but sharp, as all of her essays are, and very, very powerful. Will give you a lot of food for thought. Next we have one of my absolute favourite reads of 2018. It is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. This got so much attention when it was first published and has been brought back again now, and I'm so glad to see it. This was particularly eye-opening for me, especially when we are talking about Black history and how much history is left out of the British school curriculum. There were so many moments when reading this where I was absolutely flabbergasted. Like, I'd never been taught so many things that were in this book, and I just thought, how can this be allowed? It also talks about Reni Eddo-Lodge's complete frustration at the lack of empathy and just the lack of care from the white people in her life on the topic of racism and how we just need to do better. We need to do better. I'd also really recommend Nikesh Shukla's essay collections. These come from a variety of different authors. The Good Immigrant focuses on a whole range of different POC and immigrant experience, whereas Rife focuses particularly on young people, 16 to 24-year-olds, and their experience of growing up British in the 21st century, and just give so many very powerful perspectives on what it is like to live in the UK now. My final read to talk to you about today is Black Tudors by Miranda Kaufman. Full disclosure, Miranda Kaufman is a white historian, and this really demonstrated for me how lacking my history shelves are in diverse histories. But this talks about the experience of Tudor England and the black people who lived in Tudor England. I remember last year when Mary Queen of Scots came out, how people were outraged by the fact that Adrian Lester and Gemma Chan were cast in the roles of traditionally white historical figures. And often the criticism that was levelled was all centred around, but there weren't people of colour in Britain in the Tudor period. And it's just like, may I present to you this book? This does look at individuals who are living in Tudor England, but it also takes a slightly wider approach, looking at Europe, at Africa, at America, our trade with these countries, our relationships to these countries. It really gives you the sense that 16th century Europe was not as stagnant and everyone just staying in their own country as I feel like history often makes it seem. I'm also really keen to read Black and British, A Forgotten History, and I really am keen to get as many recommendations for history non-fiction as possible, so please, 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 I would love to get more. As I say, this is not an exhaustive list in any way, shape or form. There are so many voices that I still need to get to, so many books I still need to get to, and I would love to hear more from you of what you recommend. We need to read more, we need to do better, we need, most importantly, to listen. I hope that you're all doing okay. I hope you're having a good day, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks. Bye.